Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein. Thank you for joining me again tonight as we do the chapter review for Chapter 9 from the book I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. It's a book about one man's walk to a transformation, his recovery from selfishness, self-centeredness, alcoholism, drug abuse, and in general, just bad behavior. And it was written in 1934. This was the copy I read out of right here. I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. This one was, I don't know how, it doesn't have a first edition moniker written in it, but it was written, this was printed in 1934, which is when the book was written. So I think it is a first edition, but either way, it doesn't matter too much. I will be today reading and referencing this one. This is a facsimile reprint of the book that I just showed you. They titled it Believing in False Gods, I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. I'm sure there's some sort of copyright thing that caused them to have to do that, but regardless, that's where we are. And this one, I have this copy so I can highlight, write in, all that good stuff. So I am looking forward to it. So if you could go ahead and give us a like and a follow on the Facebook page or right here on YouTube, that would be fantastic. We also have the page over on the Spotify channel, as well as on Apple Music. I think we're actually on Amazon as well. So if you'd like to, go ahead and check that out. That would be great. So let's go ahead and let's get into it. This is, like I said, chapter 9 from the book, again, called I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. This was was a member of the Oxford group. This was not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. This was prior to Alcoholics Anonymous even being formed. This was written in 1934. Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't technically founded until 1935. Big Book didn't come out until 1939. So this is preceding that. And then, of course, this all had to take place before the book was written, right? So this is a couple years prior. But there's a lot of the tenets that are in this man's story that were pulled out for all 12-step programs, right? This is, which originated, of course, in AA and then has been broadened to many different areas of recovery. But we have this 9th chapter, which is the business of living the other way around. And I think that's great. He seems to lead pretty well from the previous chapter. He ends it in a telling way. You know, the last line of the last chapter was God's orders to his followers are never simply right or left. They are halt, turn around, forward, march, right? Completely turning around. And this chapter is titled The Business of Living the Other Way Around. So it's a pretty cool thing. Yeah, I just think it's cool how he's written it in that way, where it develops in that way. And this isn't the first chapter that's done that, even though this might be the first time I think I've pointed it out. So the subtext to this as well is quite telling. I mean, it doesn't leave much to be questioned between the title and the subtitle. It's the business of living the other way around. Then the subtitle is redirection, right? Which is what this whole thing's about, is changing the way we're walking and where we're going and the place we're actually pursuing at the end of the day. So it's the whole chapter's regarding that, and I think this is a good summation of it, or at least to get us started with. And it's a quote right off of the first page, which is page 123 for those who have the book and are following along. In most areas of my life, I let myself be guided by a force that was pulling in the very opposite direction from God. Forces working in opposite directions nullify each other. That, I think, is why the selfish indulgence of my desires canceled out their own satisfaction. That is why my self-directed thinking led nowhere, either for myself or others, right? So we're starting this whole chapter off right away by getting into stating, like, the way, just reminding us that the way we lived previous is not an effective way to actually live. It provides no source for growth. It doesn't actually let us help other people, help society, really have a positive impact on things. And that's it's written in an interesting way where he's talking about actually walking away from God and how he provides and how that helps, or not provide, excuse me, how that can initiate feelings of being stuck, right? Because he says it nullifies his own actions, right? Because God's pulling him this way, he's walking this way, and so he just is stuck right in the middle. The two forces nullify each other. He says here, forces working in opposite directions nullify each other, right? So if you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling you're not making progress, right, you might want to take a look at what your actions are actually, which way your actions are actually pulling you. Are they only selfish and self-serving, or are they God-centered? Are they working towards the direction, a power greater than yourself, whatever that might be for you, a God of your understanding, would have you be going in? Now, that is if you're not finding yourself to be of genuine help to other people, right? Or if you're just worrying about your own comfort or pleasure, or your own peace of mind as your primary motivator, these are real questions you got to take a look at. So, and then on the next page, he already starts talking about things we talked about in the last chapter a little bit, where he let God in, and this leads to joy, and this leads to peace, and this leads to understanding, right? He gets more than he thought was possible living a God-centered life. He gets more than he knew he could have with a God-centered life. And I think that's something many people find out, is there's a lot more out there, or there's a lot more to living a life with a power greater than yourself at the main focus point of it. I think a lot of people think, well, what about me, right? They have that selfish thought, that self-centered thinking that keeps them stuck, but they don't realize that's what's keeping them stuck. Well, what's in it for me? And he goes and he talks about his removal of his physical desires in a sinful way, and how that just following God's will brings him so many more positive things. And one point that I think is very important too, and I think that gets just in my narrow and brief experience with recovery, gets lost on a lot of people, or a lot of people forget this point. He talks about the need for constant improvement, to continue to move forward, to be motivated to continue to completely change yourself, to completely dedicate yourself to this process of growth and spiritual understanding. And it's to not give yourself a cop-out, to don't have hesitation, to really surrender yourself completely to this process, right? On page 124, right in the middle of the page, right at the end of the first paragraph there, the purpose of the Oxford group is to hold one always to the highest. The purpose of the Oxford group is to hold one always to the highest, and they did not let me hesitate halfway, right? It's not the Oxford group was not about just the bare minimum to get by. This was not about just a selfish execution of the principles of the program, a selfish execution of these things to just make yourself feel better, right? Like, that's not what being a part of the Oxford group was about. If you're only there for relief, it's not going to work out for you, right? The Oxford group demanded that you do more, right? They had the four absolutes of love, purity, unselfishness, and what's the fourth one? Purity, honesty. And that means you have to incorporate those into your entire life. And so this is an important thing, right? It's no half measures here. That might sound familiar to some. And he goes on after this too. Like, there's individuals, I've met them, and I was walking this way for a bit in my recovery and my spiritual journey, where he refers to them as the Oriental mystic, where is content to submerge himself in God just to gain cessation from desire and peace and joy, and that self-forgetfulness invariably brings, right? So he's saying people do this and they get these benefits, right? They get some peace, they get some joy from separating completely from the world and holding on to it for themselves. But he goes on to talk about how the Christian mystic is what he called it, which I thought was a very interesting way to phrase it, because you don't necessarily think about it like that, but it's a spiritual person that is part of the Christian religion. And so a Christian mystic would technically be an applicable term, which is kind of cool. But he talks about them as a working mystic, meaning evangelizing, maybe is a way to say it, or someone going to share this message, going to help plant the seeds of a different way of life with somebody else, right? Not just attaining this peace and joy and holding on to it for oneself, but to actually share this message with others, to go out and to carry this message, right? And they do that because it's not. He talks about the desire, or the growth and the path of the Christian mystic, as he said, is not to seek joy, right? It's not to find peace, not to find that self-serving peace and pleasure, though that is a side effect of it. But the side that those things come as a side effect of seeking God's will, of seeking that power greater than yourself's will, and carrying that to others. So what we're talking about here actually is intention. What is your intention for your spiritual practice? What is your intention for the way you're living, for the changes that you're making? Are they only to serve you? Right? And there will be some selfishness involved in this, at least at the beginning, right? Because you're not driven to this way of life because your life's great, usually. Usually you have some pain going on. You have some complications going on. You have some your feelings of listlessness and loss and just directionless, right? So you come here to find this, right? To find a redirection. And in that redirection, the intention is said to seek God's will. And then all of those things get fixed one way or another. And I know it's a big promise. It's been my personal experience. It's been the experience of so many other people that have done this too. It's been the experience of VC Kitchen. And obviously that's what we're reading about, right? And I think that is a crucially important thing to remember as you're traversing your own spiritual path, right? That to be of service and to give this away and to allow people to grow and understand and to maybe plant seeds of a spiritual life in someone else for them to then reap and to walk in. It's pretty powerful. It's pretty important thing, right? So yeah, intention is a big thing. Intention for us. And that there's not a good enough, right? This isn't like, yeah, that's good enough. I quit drinking, right? I quit womanizing. I quit swearing. I quit doing drugs. I quit gambling. Those are good things, right? Those are positive things in your life. But there's more to it than that, right? There's living a spiritual life, walking this narrowing path, right? And that's what that concept of a narrowing path is about, right? Like when we start, stopping those things is good enough. But as per this book and so many other books and so many other practices, that is not enough in the end, right? As you continue to make progress, as you continue to grow, you need to make more surrenders, is what it is. You need to, in your own time. That's the thing. Like, you will know when it's appropriate because it will become painful. It's the reality of it. Or you will be guided to do so, maybe, right? That we talk about that a little bit, actually quite a bit coming up. But it's the narrowing path is understanding not only what is not acceptable anymore, but what is the purpose of your practice going forward too. So the path narrowing is, it comes all to this point where it's might be a narrow path, but it's a sure path. It's a solid path, and it's one that all will walk that same path, that same with those same structure. How to say it? Similar structural beliefs, right? They might have different names or a little bit different way they look, but that narrowing path has some basics to it, right? It has some requirements to it to actually continue to move forward down. And that's what that kind of is about. It's understanding more and more what's not acceptable and what you should be doing, and actions you should be taking, how you should be conducting yourself. So there's not a good enough, right? There's no settling. And again, this is a rebirth in a lot of ways too. I think one of the chapter subtitles is Reborn or Rebirth. And there's a lot of texts about this. There's a lot of different literature that talks about these things, right? A second life, 2 lives, 1 body, as some people I know say. And you have to surrender that other life completely. You can't live a spiritual life and a selfish life. It just doesn't work that way. Eventually, this one will rule the other out, and you're going to have to make that choice. You're going to have to surrender the old way of living to a new way of living. And now when you do that fully, when you actually take those actions fully, you'll realize more and more the benefit that it has for you personally, right? Initially, it's begrudging maybe. Initially, it's a slow process or it's a painful process, but it does get better. So one of the big things he talks about here, right? Well, the main thing really, because he's had a lot of experiences already. He's already changed his life. He's talked about physical desires being removed from him. His thinking patterns have changed, all of this stuff, right? So he's made the improvements that he's cared to make, right? Quit smoking, quit drinking, quit womanizing, like all of his favorite things he's realized were bad. And he's been moved by the Spirit to stop them. So he did. We talked about going to celebrate to get a glass of gin out of his cupboard and or pantry, and he felt the guidance to say he couldn't serve God if he was drinking, so he quit drinking, right? It was removed from him. Desire was removed from him to do those things. The temptation was no longer there. That's a really big thing. And what he realizes after, he says about 6 months into his recovery, we'll say, well, his spiritual journey, his recovery, his new life, right? That he's getting oriented to, orientation, right? I think that was the subtitle of the last one, is in his prayers, he realizes his selfishness. Now, this is a big one. This is a very important understanding because it is a display of a shift in mindset, really, at the end of the day. It's a display in the understanding that I am not in this world to tell God how to run it. I am in this world to be of service to God and my fellow man in the way this power greater than myself, this God of my understanding, is guiding me to do that, right? Like it took me a while to realize me going and telling God how to run this world doesn't really work out. That's me playing God, right? I don't think God needs suggestions really at the end of the day. So he realizes his prayers must change, right? He goes from telling God, or maybe not telling, maybe that's a too strong of a word, but requesting that God does certain things, to taking himself out of it in the sense of like taking his opinion out of things and asking for God's will to be affected through him, for God to guide his will and his actions in his life, right? This might sound like familiar language to those who are part of a 12-step program. And again, you will feel that way because this experience that he's having is interwoven into the 12 steps of whatever program you might be a part of, right? So this is familiar. This is familiar territory for familiar verbiage. But he turned around completely with his prayers. He stopped taking from the world and asking God to give from the world. He took the complete opposite perspective and he said, God, tell me what to put into this world, right? Tell me what to give this world. He went from taking to giving, right? Instead of demanding from this world, he said, what can I give to it? It's a whole different perception, right? He changes from being selfish and self-centered and egotistical to inviting God to do his will through him, right? And he could feel the change, right? Like, I can't remember if he said it was immediately in that moment, but he said he could feel the change, like a power. Instead of his own power trying to be put into the universe, he felt like he was connected to something beyond himself that could work through him, that was pouring into him, right? Like, that's so many people's experience, that suddenly they're like, oh, this energy, this power, this flow of the world, this universal energy that I feel like I can actually connect to, this power, this creator, maybe, whatever your spiritual belief is. And again, this is a very God-heavy chapter, and this does come from the Christian denomination and Christian practice. So if you take issue with that, I encourage you to hear whatever words you might need to hear, right? In the sense of whenever I say the word God or Jesus Christ, I think is going to be referenced in this chapter too. Know that you can substitute what you need to substitute in there, and your perspective that you need to substitute in there too, right? I'm speaking from this text, and I feel like that's an important thing to say here. And I'll try to interweave it, and do my best, but there's a lot of that Christian influence in this at this point in time. But he felt like, VC Kitchen felt like he was connected finally to something outside of him that he was bringing into himself, that he could bring into this world that was positive and good and right. And he was again turned around, which redirection again is the subtitle for this chapter. So he was turned around in his prayer. Instead of bringing these things to God and asking God to fix them for him, he tells God, hey, what would you have me do? What would you have me be? How would you have me think? How would you have me act? Whole different thing. And that's an amazing thing, right? And he then shifts quickly into this process of surrender, right? He realizes when he first started this program, when he first started this process, it was his first surrender. And that was surrender to say, hey, there's a better way to live. I don't want to do this anymore. Let me follow God's will. But he didn't realize he was still being so very self-centered, so self-absorbed, so selfish in these things, right? So this was a second surrender, right? It was, instead of serving himself and his selfish needs, self-centered desires, or whatever it might be, self-gratification, he's now asking God to use him in whatever way God sees fit. Now, there's no guarantee that that's going to feel good right away, right? There's no guarantee that's going to be things he wants to do, right? But he talks about this being his second major surrender, right? And this is that switch from taking from the world to giving to the world, to putting into the world from a godlier understanding. So he changed the frame. And I wrote this down, that he stated he changed from being passively obedient to God to actively and creative working for God, right? So it's like, hey, I'm going to stop doing, I ask God for help. I'm going to stop doing the things he doesn't want me to do, right? It's going from, I'll stop taking the actions that are selfish and self-centered, to I want to do the things he wills me to do. I want to do the things that are right in God's eyes. This is a whole different concept, right? instead of being told no, instead of saying no, it's saying I will. It's a whole different thing. And you begin to take actions that are not necessarily in your own personal best interest, which is a new concept to many, right? He starts to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether or not it serves him or he thinks it's right. Or he thinks it could be better done, maybe is a better way to say it. So he goes to this person that is trying to put into the world again. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's an amazing thing to be able to see someone do. And this surrender takes his own selfish interest out, right? Because if you're praying to God, hey, help this person recover from cancer, not to say that's a bad thing, but that's putting your own interest on it. That's putting your own opinion on it. That's putting these things into it that is your influence that aren't needed, right? Allowing God to take the actions he needs to take and that person to reach out to the God of themselves, right? There's nothing wrong to be praying for a person by any means. But understand that to seek and do the will of God in your life is the utmost responsibility that we have in this world, I believe. So he speaks about how it is also his responsibility now to kind of embody the joy of God, the joy of a God-centered life. And we're going to read a quote too, because a lot of, like I said in the beginning, this is not something new. A lot of people believe that, when you become religious or you find God or whatever the terminology you want to use is, you instantly become boring, or you become sad, you become reserved, or you become you have no joy in your life, right? That's not the case. And he talks about how he gets guided to go to these parties. It's an interesting part of this, right? Because it's just part of me actually is, I'll be honest here. It's sometimes even hard for me to hear someone talk about being guided by God so much, because it just amazes me that someone is. Now, I don't doubt that, but he talks about it so candidly, like it's his second nature, which it very well might be for him. Like, I'm not taking that away from him. But it's something that I personally would love to strive for. It's something that I personally want to embody in my life, is this idea and this understanding and this belief that I am truly being guided, right? Because he talks about going to dinner parties. He talks about going to these parties with his wife, right? And he says here, it is more often, I believe, this is page 127 for those that are following along, more often I believe God guides me to a party to show my old crowd that living one's life to God does not make one queer, which is odd, right? It is to show them that working modern Christians do not become down in the mouth, cranks, but they actually outlive, outlaugh, outlove the pagans, right? Like, to show that contrast. And he's a fantastic example of it, where when you live that pagan lifestyle, which means you're serving your own personal pleasure, your own personal power, your own personal prestige, personal applause, and all these possessions. You can get all of that. You can have those things in your life all the time, and you can think you're having a great life. But at the end of the day, you take all that out, you're hollow, you're empty. You need those things to fill you. And VC Kitchen saying, no, there is a much better life outside of that. There's a much better life when following Christ and when following God and putting all those other things to the side. And he takes it as his responsibility to go show people that it is possible. And sometimes I believe that's my responsibility too, to show people how good a life can be outside of drugs and alcohol, and how much you can actually live and love and laugh and have joy and happiness and freedom in your life, and you don't need these things. And to be free from mental health sicknesses like depression and anxiety and fear, and have a way of living that you never thought was possible, right? Like, it's almost our duty to carry that, right? He also talks about how sometimes when he's guided to a party with his wife or something, that he sometimes is guided to talk to somebody, right? To share a message with somebody that needs to hear it. What a powerful thing that is. To show up to the party, to show up to this gathering, and this person is there that you realize needs to have a conversation about God, or needs to have a conversation about something you have experience with, that you can show them some encouragement, some hope, and some excitement that has got to be different, right? That's a blessing of an opportunity to be able to share encouragement with somebody and hope with somebody. That's one of the biggest blessings you could actually have, is that opportunity, right? And these instances of being guided, whether it's to show through his own personal character the joys of being Christ-centered and God-centered, or to show up to these parties and be a beacon of hope for those who are in need of and are in a painful place, right? It's not about him anymore. It's not about him taking and him flirting with somebody, getting drunk, smoking cigarettes, consuming whatever narcotics he absolutely can. We talk about that a little bit later in the sense in the inventory that's talked about in this chapter. But there's this different understanding that he has when he goes to these parties. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. And he talks about, and what this is he's really talking about being of service, right? He's talking about, well, if for those in 12-step fellowships again, and this is practiced throughout all spiritual practices, I think, or at least many of them. He's talking about the practice of really like 10, 11, and 12, where he talks about how he's going. The practice of step 10 is him saying, this is how I think, and this is my will, and this is and he's saying, this is what I want to do. And he stops and he surrenders that to God and says, what would you have me do? And that's step 11, right? That constant contact, right? Or whatever spiritual practice that you have. That could be sitting in the presence of God or nature or your creator or your source or that energy, whatever it might be for you, right? Having that time with that, to be in the presence of it, right? And I don't like to refer to 12-step only here. It's just the structure that this can frame around. And then we go into that service aspect, which is really represented by the 12-step of any 12-step fellowship, but the actual practice of being of service to that power greater than yourself, your fellow man, your community, whatever it might be, right? So we're surrendering our will, asking for guidance, and being of service. Right? That's the combination for growth. That's the combination for living this spiritual lifestyle, right? So, and whatever your spiritual practice is, it usually encompasses these things. It usually has the surrender of desire, surrender of your own will, the sublimation of that. I'm not sure if that's the right word I should be using there, but the request to have that taken away, to do what the right thing is, to take the right action for the right reason at the right time because it's the right thing to do, and not because it serves me or because it serves you, but more so it's being of service to those things, to those people, to that God of your understanding, whatever that might be, right? Those are big things. So he again goes to talk about how he is given this guidance, right? He's given this direction through this communion with God, this prayer, this meditation, and whatever he feels like he's being guided to do. He used to be resentful at going to parties. He used to not want to talk to people. He used to think things were exhausting, whether it was work or whatever. And he talks about how he's always given what he needs to complete the task. Now I'm going to read this part here on 128. Following God's guidance is by no means a drearily submissive form of obedience. It doesn't mean like you're a whipped dog, right? You're not a depressed slave. It is something you can always do willingly and gladly, right? If you can just embark on this journey, it can turn out pretty well. God, in fact, has never called upon me to do anything without giving me the power, the courage, the words, the wisdom, the money, the love, the patience, the foresight, the stimulation, or whatever else I might need to accomplish the desired result, right? So he's placing his reliance completely upon God in this, right? And some people might say, well, he has to take some actions. And yes, he has to take some actions, right? But there's a certain amount of faith that has to come into this too, right? Or else it's just your own will. If you believe what's supposed to happen will happen if you take the right actions. And this is a lot about living one day at a time, right? This is a lot about trust and faith and knowing in this God of your understanding, this power greater than yourself. So have faith that you will get what you need to carry out the task sufficiently for the desired outcome or the intention that God has set for you, or for that task. It's a lot harder than it seems because we have a lack of faith many times. A lot of us are agnostic about this stuff, and we don't realize, or we have doubts. And I would actually venture to say, if you have doubts, it's good because you actually are questioning and pursuing truth. And if you do that, what's the term? God usually doesn't make too hard of terms with those who seek him. So doubts aren't necessarily a bad thing. I do want to say that. So it's interesting. He kind of takes a shift here. And he talks about how before he only knew God intellectually, and he didn't actually know God. He just had come to the conclusion that there was a God for various reasons. And there's so much wrong with that. So I'm going to read how he phrased it first, and that's on 129. Knowing him only as a conclusion, however, meaning, hey, there must be a God somewhere, right? But that's as far as you go. I could not conclude that what he wanted me to do in my relations with other people, right? Like, just because you intellectually believe there's a God doesn't mean you're actually asking for the guidance here. And since these conclusions took place entirely in my own mind, which I find laughable, I usually concluded that I was just about perfect, but that something should be done about other people to make the world a more comfortable background for my personal exploits and to remove the various obstructionists who disturbed the even tenor of my ways, right? So I think this is a place where a lot of people come to that's a problem. And people say they believe in God, but no, they've really just come to the conclusion that there's probably a God. They don't actually take the steps to follow God's will in their life. They don't actually have the faith to practice the principles of a God-centered lifestyle, right? Of a spiritual way of living, of a spiritual path, to take these actions and make these surrenders to this thing, right? Because what he's talking about here, I personally relate to. When I was younger, I was a God person. Then I became an atheist because I didn't even think there was logically a way to make a God fit in my mind, and I just became completely lost. But that's a story for another time. So for him to say, when he wrote this down, I love that he wrote it down. He's so honest in this book. He came to only the conclusion, because he didn't actually know God, so he just concluded that his opinions on how to deal with people or how people should be were absolutely 100% correct, and nothing he needed to change nothing about himself. And I thought that was hysterical, because so many people believe the world needs to change for them, including me. I was one of those people for a long time. That was one of the reasons I didn't get along well with the world, and so he thought he should go dole out how the world should change, right? Like, I'm good. I'm thinking rationally, and everyone should serve the will that I've deemed appropriate for them. What does that sound like? Sounds like God to me. We like to play God. We like to have faith in our own reasoning and have faith in our own perspective, but that doesn't serve us well. We become just selfish and self-centered individuals that really just crush other people and step on the throats of others. And it's very, very sad. It's very self-serving perspective to have on God. To say, yeah, there's a God out there. Okay, now I think the world needs to look like this. It's very selfish, egotistical, self-absorbed, egocentric, whatever you want to say. Prideful is a good one too. But it only serves us. It only serves that individual that thinks like that, right? To have an actual relationship with your creator is a whole different thing. And that's what he's talking about building. And that surrender to prayer, saying, God, use me for your will instead of doing the will I believe you should be doing. It's a whole different thing. So he then goes into a laughable portion about trying to control his wife and how to control her behavior and control his kids and this and that and everything. And how he was just trying to make sure everybody was doing what he thought they were supposed to be doing, right? And because of this program and this surrender he goes into this understanding that finally that to change, he can't change anybody else if he can't actually change himself, because he kept failing to change himself, right? So, and if he can't change himself, he can't change others. And if he can't change others, he can't change systems. He can't change politics. He can't change his community. Right? His words are hollow. They carry no weight. So it starts to change here. He starts, because of this, the Oxford group and this spiritual living and this practice and this relationship with the God of his understanding and this willingness to surrender his will, he stopped trying to control others and started to try to control himself, right? We hear that so much, that you're only responsible for you, right? You are your only problem, in the sense that how you behave, how you react, how you respond, how you interact with other people, what you do, that is your concern. What other people are doing, yes, it might have an impact on your life. It might affect you personally, but it is not about you. That is their responsibility. If they don't want to take advice, if they don't want to change it, if they don't, whatever, it's not yours, right? It's not yours to mold them into who you think they should be, right? He also, this is an important point to kind of, I wanted to say, he talks about how when he finds himself having sharp words with his kids, he knows it's because of something within him that's unresolved. It's something within his spirit that he needs to address. And that is a huge thing, right? The blame game's so easy these days. There's people out there that love that. They love to put their problems because of someone else's, give someone else the responsibility to make them feel better about themselves, right? And to say, I'm angry because you did this. That's what he's talking about with his son. And he realizes, no, that's a me problem. And he's starting to take full accountability for his own behavior and his own actions, and wants to align that to the loving Christ ideal that he holds and is working towards. That's pretty impactful, right? That's a pretty substantial shift. And again, I love that this was redirection, right? That it said at the end of the last chapter that we have to turn around completely and walk towards God instead of walking away, right? So, and that's what he's doing here. He's going from focusing externally to control others, to control himself, to putting his reactions on other people, to taking accountability for his own personal inventory. Talk about a complete reversal of things, right? So, it's just a beautiful thing to watch the progression of this. So let's go ahead and we're going to read and some examples of this, actually. So on page 131, we're going to start as for drinking companions part, and we're going on to the next page a little bit. As for drinking companions, I no longer happen to drink, while as for society, we both have learned to turn to people of worth rather than to think how much they are worth, and to move in circles where God has use for us rather than with people we think we can use. Right? Right there, perfect example, perfect illustration of the reversal of his thinking, right? Like, what are these people worth to me? To going, how can I be a person of worth? It goes from being externally focused to internally focused. Whole different thing. Whole different way of living, right? Taking the responsibility to develop the character and being a person of worth is wholly different, right? And instead of trying to find people to use, trying to be of use to others. 100% flip of his personality, his character, his actions, right? It's just, he starts giving. He starts putting in. He starts improving the world instead of saying the world is shit and taking from it. Excuse the language. And he says this great line here that I think rings true today for so many, and it's the soul of reformation. And I say this because there's so many people that think so much stuff needs to change, and they might be right, but how it needs to change is what this quote's about. And it's just a simple line of the soul of reformation. The soul of change is the reformation of the soul. So the change of the soul. So the soul of reformation is the reformation of the soul. If you want to change the things in the world, change yourself first. Take the responsibility to change your soul, to change your actions, to move forward in the improvement of your own character. And if enough people do that, the world's reformed, right? That's the initiative we have to take. The change must come from within. It must come from within individuals. You can't change things from the top down anymore. It just doesn't work like that, right? We build from the bottom and then the top changes. I think James Allen talks about how these big things, like it could be, we could be talking about federal government or whatever it might be, or it could be talking about a physical object, right? Relies on the quality of all these small little things that make it, right? So the federal government is reliant upon the quality of the character of the people it serves, right? The people that give it that power. Like a physical object is reliant upon the cuts and the formation of the pieces and the quality of the materials and the quality of the craftsmen that build the thing, right? There's so many things that need to go right for one big thing to look right and go well. So, and that's just something to remember. The soul of reformation is the reformation of the soul. That's where change happens. So, he begins to actually also talk about too, where he realizes like the things he actually brings into this world, his character, all the good things that are coming around really come from this God of his understanding, really come from, in his case, Christ, from Jesus Christ, the ideal that he's following, the people, this power that he worships, this God of his understanding, right? And again, that can be whatever you'd like that to be for you: creator, source, universal energy, the universe, nature, whatever you'd like that to be for you. I understand there's different opinions on that, but to realize that everything good in him comes from God and it's not of his own doing is a humbling statement coming from the guy that was so egotistical and arrogant. So he talks, one thing I did like that he talked about how he was going to improve the world and have this beautiful plan and like institute what he thought was right. And he talks about how his plans for the future and what he believes the future should look like, and his investments in the future are really blocking out God's will, because God might try to use something. God might come in or have an opportunity to be of service in some other way, right? And to be flexible and be willing and to be understanding that your responsibility is what's presented to you in a day, and not to impose your views or your will on somebody else. Like, all right, James Allen has a fantastic book called Byways of Blessedness. I would highly encourage it because he talks about there how we need to stop imposing our own perspective on other people. We need to stop being so attached to our opinions as right. Allow everyone else the dignity of being their own person and being exactly who they are. And offering help when requested and willingly received, right? But we need to depend on God for the appropriate actions today. It's not about me. It's not about my perspective. It's not about my understanding. It's about directing people towards a God of their understanding, a God that they can have a relationship with. It's God. It's not me. Now, the coolest part, and I know this one's going long. I told you there's going to be a lot of stuff in this, is the inventory at the end. And I think that's a wonderful inventory. I think it's a really cool concept, actually. Before I read this book, I hadn't heard of it before, and I would encourage anybody to do it. I'm going to read the instructions again here because it's just really cool, and why he did it. So this whole change in direction, this whole change from taking from life to investing and giving into life, this whole change in direction in my life can best perhaps be illustrated through a version of the game Truth. The name of the game is Truth, taught me by a member of the Oxford group. So this is coming from the Oxford group. You write down the 5 things you honestly like most in life, and you write down the 5 things you most hate. Then, if any changes come into your life, you write them down again to show the comparison between your old life and the new. And then this is how the game works for me, right? So think back to your life before a change and write down the 5 things that you liked most. And then write down the 5 things that you hated most. And then think where you are today and write down the 5 things that you like most. And then the 5 things that you hate the most, right? And it's a reminder for where you came from, first and foremost. It's a reminder of your progress. That's one thing I like about this, is it shows progress. And those those instructions are on page 134 to 135, by the way. And it shows also the direction that you're taking, right? What you value today and what you dislike today show to some effect the way you're actually going in your life, what you're actually entertaining in your life. So if you take this as a self-explorative, I don't know if that's the right way to say that word, a self-exploration, that's the way to say it, excuse me, you're going to learn a little bit, right? You're going to learn about what shifted in your perspective, if you've become less selfish, if you've become more others-centered, God-centered, what you prioritize, what you value, what you care about, what you don't anymore, right? You'll shift so much. You'll be able to see that progress. So I think it's a really, really cool exercise. And I do also have to say on his what I hate most today, he said self, because the I is in the middle of sin. Now, I'd never heard that before, but I thought it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So there we go. That's it. That's the review for chapter 9. And it was a fantastic, fantastic chapter. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did. And I hope it did it justice during this review. So we're going to go into the next chapter. Is called This Business of Starting in School Again. So, we've stopped bad habits. We've surrendered to God's will in our life, right? Now, I think we're going to go into exploring how this looks in different aspects of life, like marriage and relationships and friendships and business and stuff like that. But so the next one is the business of starting in school again. Education is the subtitle. So I'm interested in this. I'm interested to see where it goes again. This is a very enjoyable process for me. So thank you all for coming along for the ride. I hope you all are getting something from it too. And again, go ahead, give us a like, give us a subscribe. I'd love to hear from you too. Comment. And yeah. So next weekend, we'll go through the reading for chapter 10. Here we go. So until next time, thanks.